All right. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on Power Platform Center of Excellence, Setup and Governance, ensuring success for your organization. We are very excited to be here with you today. As we get things started, we do want to first sincerely thank the sponsor of this webinar and our partner, Microsoft, for being with us through this journey and here today. My name is Annie Lee, and I am an adoption and change management consultant with WM Reply, based here in the US in Chicago. I'll be talking more with you all throughout the webinar, but I also want to introduce our full team on the call today and those that are helping to make today's event possible. So we have Wayne Mugridge with us here today, and he is our Power Platform lead. We have Matt Pesquet as well, a Power Platform consultant and guru on all things Center of Excellence. Myself, and we also have Carly Sletton, our head of marketing at WM Reply, here to help run all the magic behind the scenes. And as we get started today, we have a variety of things on the agenda. We'll talk through an introduction to Power Platform very briefly, and then go into the framework around establishing a center of excellence. So starting with secure, over to monitor, walking through alert and action, deploy, nurture, infrastructure, and support. At the end of our session today, we'll also be doing a question and answer. So be sure to enter questions for the team here today in your Q&A panel. All right, and without further ado, I think we are ready to pass it over to the team and begin our introduction to Power Platform Center of Excellence and Governance.
Thank you very much, Annie. So, hi, everybody. We're going to be talking to you today about the Power Platform. So I think it's only fitting that we kind of start with an introduction of what the Power Platform is and a little bit about what a CoE or Center of Excellence is. So on the platter in front of you, you can see some of the core components of Microsoft's Power Platform. It consists of a variety of low-code componentry such as Power Apps, Power Virtual Agent, Power BI, and Power Automate. However, there's one important caveat for our conversation today in that we're not going to be focusing on Power BI. It is technically a part of Microsoft's Power Platform, but we believe that BI in of itself is its own domain and worthy of its own governance and monitoring separate from that of the rest of the Power Platform. And so in our personal experience, we tend to manage that as a separate stream with a separate center of excellence. We're going to be focusing on Power Apps, which are the front end of the Power Platform. They allow users to build applications that they can then share with their colleagues to enable line of business processes. Power Virtual Agents, which lets you create interactive chatbots. And finally, Power Automate, which lets you power processes, be they on desktop or in the cloud. Across this conversation, we're going to make a lot of reference to Center of Excellences. So what is a Center of Excellence? At its simplest, the CoE is a team across an organization. It's a cross-functional team designed to own a particular piece of technology. You can have a CoE for anything. In our case, we're going to be talking about the Center of Excellence for the Power Platform. The core function of a CoE is not necessarily to manage the platform, although that certainly falls under their purview. The core purpose of the CoE is to grow and enable the platform so that everybody across the organization can benefit from the various different features of their platform. It's to foster adoption. It's to put in place governance and policies that ensure that the platform is used responsibly and enjoyably by everybody across the organization. So with those definitions out of the way, let's take a look at how we tend to think about setting up a center of excellence across organizations. We have here a stream or a set of tracks that we try to follow broadly, and this varies per organization, but these are kind of the core topics that we tend to focus on when setting up a center of excellence across the Power Platform. On the left-hand side, you can see the key pieces of governance and setup that need to occur. This is the technical stuff that needs to be implemented, the decisions that need to be taken with security, with IT, to ensure that the platform is set up in such a way that it meets the needs of the business, that it meets the needs of security, and that it's generally a well-configured platform. However, there's no point in setting up a platform that nobody's going to use. So in parallel to this governance track that we have, we also strongly recommend that you run a nurture and growth track at the same time. This will allow you to foster engagement on the platform even as you're putting the platform together and putting this governance in place, so that you get a really nice tight feedback loop on whether the governance and the policies you're putting in place are fostering engagement and making it easier to use, or whether they're stifling innovation. And so these two things really work well hand in hand, and we recommend you run these tracks in parallel. You're not the only organization that's looking at setting up a center of excellence, and Microsoft have recognized this. And to facilitate this process, they have put together what they call the CoE Starter Kit, which is a collection of tools and utilities all built on top of the Power Platform for the purpose of governing the platform. There are tools that fall across a couple of different key areas, such as monitoring, securing the platform, alerting and action, and even nurturing, which we'll discuss all later. However, these are just tools that you can install. They're not a complete center of excellence in of themselves. You need to install the tools, understand how they work, and put together a team to then own the platform and grow it. With those introductions out of the way, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Wayne, who's going to talk to us about some of the different areas of the platform that need to be set up, starting with securing the platform.
Excellent, thank you, Matt. As Matt mentioned, we've got that track that we're going to follow, and that's where we're going to start with this. We're going to start with the first section, which is secure. As we go through each one of these steps, we're going to give you a bit of guidance on what's available to us, so what tools are available to help us in each one of those steps, and also some examples of what are the tasks or kind of things that we should be configuring or thinking about in each one of those steps. So the first one is secure. We're going to look at things like an environment strategy, how DLPs, and how we're going to set up our whole environment, all our tenant, all of our applications are going to live, how we're going to actually secure it and govern it. So if we move on to the next slide, we'll see, well, what is available to us to help us secure this platform. And there's three core elements, really. We've got environments. So we can come up with an environment strategy, and what an environment is, in the simple terms, it's a container. It's where we can put apps in this kind of self-contained container, and it has a single database if we want to use a database per environment. We can add permissions on environment level. We can do backups on an environment level. So there's lots that we can do there, and it's all within that contained environment. Next up, we've got what's called the DLP, the data loss prevention policies. So as the name suggests, it's there to prevent accidental loss of data or even intentional loss of data by applying policies to what people can do in these environments. It can be applied across all environments or single environments, which we'll come on to. And then finally, security. There's quite a complex or quite a comprehensive, should I say, security model that we can put in place with multiple levels of security. So we'll have a look at that as well. So the first one is environments, and as you can see on the screen there, we've got the different types of environments, and one thing to consider when we're looking at environments is within your tenant, Microsoft gives you a set amount of capacity of storage for like your databases, and each one environment that you create will take up the minimum of 1 GB. It could grow when you put more data in it, but it will take up a minimum of 1 GB. And it's just something to keep in your mind as I go through this environment strategy that can help influence some of our decisions. The exception to that rule that I've said is the first one on that list, the trial environment. It's just an environment, one per user, and it's got a limit of 30 days. That doesn't go across or take any of your consumption away that Microsoft gives you, but it will expire after 30 days. There is an option to promote it, and you can promote it to a true environment, and then it's in your tenant as any other environment would be. There's the developer one, again, not widely used. It's a single user, so it's only yourself who could access it. You're not going to be able to use it for multi-user testing, but it's still quite a nice option if you do want to have a play around, or you've got different developers who are working solely on their own solutions. That could be an option. The three main ones that we're going to talk about, and the three key ones for us to consider with all of our strategies, is the default, sandbox, and production. The default environment, every single tenant has this default environment. So if you've got Power Apps turned on, you've got a default environment. It's the one that you get as standard. And what I'm going to mention on that and in the coming slides is that it's open. So actually anybody can go in and develop on that as long as they've got Power Apps turned on. So we suggest it maybe it's used as a kind of personal productivity asset string. And then you've got the two different environments there of sandbox and productions. These are the ones that we can physically create ourselves to meet our needs. And as in any software development lifecycle or organization doing true development, we've got sandbox environments which we might use for development, test, pre-prod, and then we've got our actual production environments or full non-expiring environments as well. So they're the types of environments. And when we move on and we start to look at, well, how are we going to think of how we're going to configure the environments? What environments do we need? How many do we need? One of the first steps is to have a look at what's going on within your organization at the moment. So actually getting that picture of the as it is, and trying to map that to a to be. So having a look at the kind of current usage and the appetite, what people are using. Are they using flows and apps if you've got it turned on? Do you have any environments already? Maybe you've already started creating environments. What region are they in? How are they currently set up? And then also your security needs. So different organizations might have different security needs or different needs for data to reside in different regions. So getting that picture of what your needs are, your usage and the appetite of your users. So when we actually look at the environments, and this is a really nice example, it is from a Microsoft example, but it's a nice way of picturing how these environments can come into play. I'm going to start at the top. So the top one, as I've said, is that default environment, every tenant, and you can see next to it, it says everyone is a maker. So that means that if they've got the app, the license turned on under E3, or whether they've paid for a premium license, they are able to go and make applications in that default environment. There's not a great deal you can do about that. That's just how it is. So what we say is that that should be that personal productivity environment, as I mentioned, and that lends itself into even more of a need for a good structure of other environments. So when we can take applications out of that default, that personal productivity, and start working for applications that maybe are enterprise wide or become critical for our business to run. So if you move down to the orange piece on the screen, the orange blocks there, we've got a standalone environment for a critical project with its own development. You can see next along it's got its own test environment and it's got its own production environment. And it's definitely something that we recommend that model for any either large, super complex applications or solutions that you're building, or anything that kind of comes business critical. You want to contain them in their own environment and follow a proper lifecycle management for a number of reasons. One being the backups and the access that you can restrict on an environment by environment level. Now, saying that, the reason I mentioned about the gigabyte of space consumption is that you don't necessarily need to create a development, test and prod for every single solution that you have out there. You don't want to have environment sprawl and hundreds of thousands of environments, one for storage, but also for management and governance. So in some cases, there's a need, you can share environments. There might be some smaller or medium complex applications and solutions being built. Maybe they're all for the HR department, or maybe they are all based in the Southwest area. Then you could group those applications together and actually share an environment. So development is shared, or test is shared, and production. So you could group it by business units or however your organization works and have multiple applications in there. One of the benefits of sharing the environments is obviously that you can also share the data. So if you've got a database in there and you've got a list of contacts and users, you can share that data amongst multiple different applications. There's no right or wrong way to set up this environment structure. This is just a nice example to show you the different options, and it's very much down to fitting those environments into your needs. And one last thing to note on it is sometimes people get a little bit tied down in coming up with this strategy, and it is important, but it is a flexible platform that actually, if you figure out that something's gone wrong or you've done something wrong or you want to change your strategy in the future, it's relatively easy to do so. Okay, so that was environments. Moving on next is the data loss prevention policies. As I said at the start, it is to prevent that loss of data or prevent the use of certain connectors dependent on your needs. There is hundreds, I think there's 350, maybe more connectors now on the kind of Power Platform, these out-of-the-box connectors that are there from SharePoint and SQL to Twitter. So we've got a wide range of different connectors. And what we can do is we can create a data loss prevention policy that will prevent certain connectors being used together. So it's like quite a simple concept. You've got what they call business data or non-business data, and you classify each of those connectors into one of those buckets in this policy. It doesn't matter too much on the wording, so we can ignore the wording on business data and non-business data, mainly because the functionality it provides is that if you have, say, if I put a SQL connector in the business data and I put Twitter in non-business, I can't create a workflow, an app that uses both of those. If I reverse that the other way and I put SQL in the non-business and Twitter in the business, exactly the same functionality. I just can't use those two connectors together. So the wording or where you put them doesn't matter too much. One other point to note is it's gotten even further now. We do have some extra capabilities of being able to allow certain endpoints for like your SQL servers, and even what actions can be performed by the connectors themselves. So if you're looking at OneDrive, we can actually go down and narrow down and say people can't create files, but they can do everything else. So it's quite a new capability from Microsoft, but it's growing all the time. And then as you can see on the screen at the moment, the simple concept of those buckets is easy to understand, but you can still deliver more complex solution and options by layering those policies on top of each other. So you can see right at the top there, we've got one policy that is going to span all of our environments. It's spanning the training environments and then those Contoso Europe and USA environments that you can see. And that one is just blocking all non-Microsoft connectors, and I've applied it to all my environments. So then coming down a level, number 2 on the left-hand side, I've said, well, I've got some training environments and that default one that I mentioned that's open to everyone. What I want to do is I want to apply even more restrictions on that, and actually I want to categorize certain connectors as non-business, even the Microsoft ones, because I just don't want them being used together. So I can apply that, and both of those policies will now apply to default training and both the training environments. And then last up, number 3 on the right hand side, I can create exceptions. So maybe actually our critical environments that we've got here with dev, test and prod, maybe I want to make an exception and actually allow Dropbox in these environments specifically, but only these. Then I can create that policy that gives them as an exception. So you can see layering up those policies, you can come up with some great sort of functionality to meet your needs. Okay, so moving on to security, we've actually got the 5 levels of security on here. We've got your standard security at the top, the conditional access from your Azure AD, your M365 login information that you get as standard, and then we move down into the security associated with the Power Platform itself. We've got environment roles, so all of them environments that we've just been speaking about that we're going to build, we can actually define roles within those environments, defining what people can do, who can create apps, who can access different applications or different data, and what they can actually do at the environment level. We can look at resource permissions, so obviously we can share out our apps and flows, and there's permissions on that level on the applications themselves. Next down is Dataverse, used to be Common Data Service if you've heard of that, but that's our database within the Power Platform. You've got security roles that you can define here. That actually goes down to field level security, so individual fields that you can allow people to have different access to, so it's really comprehensive. And then last up, you can look at your cross-tenant inbound and outbound connectors that you can use, whether you're connecting to APIs and database throughout those connectors. So quite comprehensive security pieces that we've got there. A couple of bits to call out really is those environment roles and those dataverse security roles, because that's what we can really define to build our solutions on. And I'll just move on to the next slide. We can see that there's a number of roles that you get provisioned out of the box. So these are your kind of standard roles at that environment level. You've got the admin, the customizer, the maker, and the service user, and that defines what they can do out the box. But we can create our own roles, and this is where the power comes in. And one bit of advice is to start with one of these roles. You can copy that role, and then you can tweak the permissions of what that person is allowed to do within the system, as I said, right down to the kind of field level in the data. So these are your starting roles, but very much recommend that you create your own roles based from these and then tweak those permissions to meet your needs. Okay, so we've spoken around all of the security and governance, and once we've got all this set up, we've probably ticked a lot of boxes, and our IT teams are happy, and we've got a nice safe environment where we know what is going to go on and where things should live and where applications should be deployed. But what we want to do next is we want to start monitoring our whole environment and see what's out there, what applications are people building. That default environment specifically, which is open, we want to see what's going on in there, what kind of applications are being built in there. If there's anything that's relevant for the business or critical for the business, maybe we want to move it out into our environment structure that we've created. So that's where the monitor comes in. You can see there's a number of steps or considerations in monitor. We're going to look at the CoE Starter Kit, so the actual tools that are available that Matt looked at the start there. There's, I think, 20 or 30 different applications and things that we can look at there. And there's other items that you can add on, such as kind of PowerShell for reporting and looking at our audit logs. So moving on to our next slide, what you can see on the left-hand side here is a screenshot of the Power BI report that you get. And again, it's a real comprehensive Power BI report, and that's really going to allow us to drill down into that data and see the bigger picture across all of our environments. So not having to look into each individual environment, but see the bigger picture, what connectors are there, what Power Virtual Agents are there, what environments, what applications, who our makers are. We can really sort of dig into that core data. And what all of that is based off, that's a key component of the CoE Starter Kit, but what all of that is based off, it's based off of storing all of that information in the Dataverse. I mentioned the Dataverse and database, so storing all of that information in that database, and the CoE Starter Kit will do that for you. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen and very quickly just show you one quick item, just to put this into a little bit more context. As you can see here, I'm just looking at the Make Power Apps, and this is where I've installed the CoE Starter Kit in my CoE test environment, and I've got a number of applications. So they're all built on the Power Platform. All of these apps that I'm getting are all Canvas applications, Power Apps, or model-driven applications. And then in the background, there's also a number of Power Automate workflows, which is great because it means that we can come into any of these and tweak them and configure them for our needs. So you can see there's a lot that we get here. I'm not going to go into all of these, but I just want to show you one real key application. It's the one where everything basically hangs off of this application, and it's called the Power Platform Admin View. I've got it open in a separate tab here. And what it is, it's just a layer in to see that database's data. And you can see here it's listing out every single one of my applications across all environments, 848 applications. So in the background, we've got a Power Automate flow that's part of that starter kit, and that is going around on a schedule, and it's querying all of the environments and pulling back all of our applications information, storing it in here, allowing us to create views or search and see exactly what we've got going on at the raw data level. If I go into one of these records, you can see I've got a form. If you're familiar with Dynamics or no model-driven applications, this is all familiar for you. I've got multiple forms that I can configure and set up. Maybe applications in my business, I want it to go through a risk assessment, so maybe I want to categorize it, so I've got some metadata around there. So I can do all of that within this model-driven application. And then we've got the concept of that business process flow. So I could have set up logic in here to say, if an application gets identified that's been shared with more than 50 users, I want it to go for a risk assessment. Or if it's using SQL as its data source, I want to want it to go through a security assessment, and I can build these trenches and steps into this business process that someone would have to complete to get it all the way to the end and have that application onboarded and business ready. So again, just wanted to very quickly show you this because it's what the whole Power Platform CoE Starter Kit tools is based off of. All of the tools look at the data that is stored in here. So it's a real key piece. Cool. Okay, so saying that, what we're going to do now, we've looked at the security and governance. We've looked at some of the Starter Kit tools that we can use to monitor our environments. Is we're going to pass back over to Matt, who's going to take us on a bit more of a detailed tour around maybe automating some of that and taking some of that pressure of us having to actually monitor these things.
Yes, indeed. So thank you very much, Wayne, for that. That's given us a really cool insight into how we can get our own insight really into the platform and what's available there. But obviously, as the platform grows and you have more and more users, more and more apps, flows, and things on the platform, it becomes difficult to go in and individually analyze every single application or every single asset on the platform. And what becomes really important is that you start to put in place automated processes to facilitate user onboarding, your knowledge acquisition around what's happening on the platform, and all of those associated activities. So in this section, we're going to talk about two key examples that we like to set up on the Power Platform to facilitate this kind of thing. We're going to talk about a process that we put in place called the new application process, and then we're going to talk about something called the welcome email and why that's really important. So this first bit, the new application process, what is it? Why is it necessary? Well, to understand that, we first need to take a quick aside and understand who is using the Power Platform and what they look to get out of it. So as you're no doubt aware, the Power Platform primarily targets this group of users that we call citizen developers. These are business users who have a great insight into their business problems, and traditionally they would then have to communicate this insight to software developers who would then implement this as a line of business application. And the Power Platform seeks to cut out this middleman, the software developer, and give the business users the tools they need to build their own line of business applications. That's a really powerful use case on the platform. But there is actually another fairly common use case that we've identified, which is to have professional developers actually use Microsoft's Power Platform as well. And you might think that's a little counterintuitive. Why are professional developers using this low-code platform? But it's actually for the very same reason that line of business users use the platform, or citizen developers. It's because it's simple. And when something is simple, you can work quicker, you have less bugs, and it's easier to iterate. And so organizations can ask professional developers to build applications on the Power Platform. And what they end up with is line of business applications that achieve the same functionality that professionally developed applications might using full fat frameworks built instead on the Power Platform for less of an investment. And that's great all around. So with these two different types of users in mind, you might imagine that there are different requirements on the platform all of a sudden for getting started. Citizen developers want really a low friction approach to starting. They want to be able to click, go, build an application. And that is more or less what the Power Platform enables, right? Every user across your organization has access to the default environment. They can go and spin up a new app or a new flow with very little friction. However, professional developers tend to need a little bit more bootstrapping for their projects for a couple of different reasons. There are things like support to consider, things like security, maybe custom environments. Professional developers are more likely to violate DLP policies that you've put in place, and therefore you need to spin up environments. They might want to use things like service accounts and DevOps processes, which we'll touch on in just a bit. And as we experienced over our professional development journey, getting all of these things put in place can take a lot of time out of your project if you have to do them each time. You have to navigate through corporate infrastructure to figure out, how do I provision AD groups? How do I provision service accounts? And so what we've come to recommend to organizations is they put together a new project process that can realistically be as low tech or as high tech as you want, as long as it's clear cut and well defined. So on the sort of very simple to implement side, it's really just a set of documentation that explains, based on your user type, if you're a professional developer or a citizen developer, here are the resources you need to provision and here's how to provision them. However, if you want to invest just a little bit more and really reduce the cost of entry for professional development on the Power Platform, we recommend you build an application that facilitates this new project process. And the application consists of 3 kind of key areas or key steps. The first thing to do is to gather information about the project the developer wants to start. And we'll gather all kinds of information, all the way from simple support information, like who can we send an email to if this application needs support, through to more technical stuff like which connectors and which platforms does this project need to integrate with. And we'll consume all of this data to make informed decisions about what resources need to be provisioned for this project. Okay, we need to spin up a new environment because the connectors you've told us you're going to use will violate the DLP policy. And with all of this information, we can now check with the relevant people across the organization whether we have the go-ahead. We can send this through to an approval process, and we can split that approval process up as necessary to the relevant parts of the organization: IT, security, Power Platform ownership, Office 365 group, whoever it is across the organization can all approve individually. And then we can once again kind of split into 2 different directions. We can either say, right, we've got all the information that we need. We can then communicate all of this information to the various different groups who can action on this. So the Azure team can receive the request for the Azure function, whereas the Office 365 team can receive the request to provision new users, new service accounts. Or we can actually facilitate this even more by producing a set of Azure functions that automate all of this stuff for you. And so what you end up with in this kind of best case approach is a simple form that users fill in, an approval, and then within a couple of hours, all of the resources that you need to start a new Power Platform project. And the cost to entry there is really low, and it means it's a lot easier to do professional development on the platform. So that's how we can facilitate professional development a little bit. Let's talk a bit about citizen developers and what we can do to help them out. When you're a citizen developer, as I mentioned, you don't want to have to go through a bunch of processes to understand where to build your applications, how to build them, what are the different policies in place. And so because of this, users tend to just go to the platform and do things, right? They don't go and read policy documentation. They just go to make.powerapps.com and press new app, and they get started right there. And this is great in terms of discoverability. It means that people are going to test these tools and use them. But there are 2 things you want to avoid in this case. The first thing that might happen is users might see the platform and get intimidated, right? There's a lot of different componentry there. What is a Power App? Why are there different types of apps? What's Canvas versus Portal versus model driven? And so with all of this complexity or variety, should I say, they might get intimidated and abandon the platform. That's not a good thing, because the platform has the tools they need to really make their lives easier. We want to encourage users to use it. The other bad thing that might happen is that the user actually doesn't see this complexity as an issue. They dive right in and they're just experimenting, they get started, and they end up building something that is useful. However, because they skipped all of the information that we wanted to provide to them about things like data governance, things like naming conventions, whatever is in our Power Platform policy, they're blissfully unaware of all of this stuff. And so their application, which now is maybe growing in user base because they happen to have built something really fantastic, eschews all of the conventions that we might want them to be following. And we can remedy actually both of these use cases with a very simple thing, a welcome email that we send to new users on the platform. The idea behind the welcome email is we detect when somebody's built something on the platform for the first time, and we send them a really friendly email with a couple of key points in it. We tell users a little bit about how to use the platform. We can link them to tutorials, for example, that we've created in-house, or reference Microsoft's really great set of Power Platform tutorials. And we can link users to governance and policy documentation that they may or may not read, but at least they now have access to this documentation. They know where to find it in future. And if you really want them to go through this process, we can actually improve the welcome email to be a bit of a self-regulating thing where you're not actually allowed to create content on the platform until you pass maybe an introductory exam or a quiz, if you will, based on some of this policy documentation. These are potential improvements that we could make. So I hope that's given you a little bit of a flavor of some of the tools and processes we can put in place to automate the platform a little bit, to make it easier for end users and for us as Power Platform admins to manage the platform. we're going to talk a little bit now about professional development, which I touched on in just a bit earlier. One of the great things about the platform is how simple it is, right? You go, you create an application, you press share when you're ready, and all of a sudden, end users can start consuming this app. However, the simplicity is a bit of a double-edged sword, because for your initial deployment of your application, it's really easy to get started. You create your thing and it's available to end users. However, because you only have this one copy of this application, when you need to start making changes to it, what you're effectively doing is making changes in production. And professional developers or anybody who really wants to maintain some level of uptime and availability for their applications will shy away from that notion. Making changes in production is generally bad. It leads to things like either, in the best case, downtime and unavailability or unexpected bugs, all the way to the worst case, which is data loss because you've pushed something that deleted records by mistake, for example. And so when we develop stuff professionally on the Power Platform, we want some kind of security against this. And Microsoft have recognized this, and they've started to build a set of tools available for us that are technically part of the CoE Starter Kit called the Alm Accelerator for Advanced Makers. And the Alm Accelerator for Advanced Makers is effectively a set of pipelines and processes that allow us to manage Power Platform development in the same way we would professional development, but while preserving all of the simplicity of building on the Power Platform. Once you start using the Alm Accelerator for Advanced Makers, you build applications in your own personal development environment, which is as easy as ever. And then with a simple click of a button, your application is pushed into version control. It can then be merged with other developers' code as necessary. And finally, with a few more clicks of a button and potentially some approvals, we can deploy that to UAT environments for proper testing, and then finally to production environments where end users can use a product that's been properly tested and evaluated and where we're sure nothing bad is going to happen. Let's take a quick look at what that process looks like in a little bit more detail. What I have here is a sample DevOps process that we might consider for an organization. And so the idea behind this is we're using Azure DevOps as our backlog for information, and we have a team of developers working on a project. And in this project, what we'll do is we'll grab some functionality from the backlog, a user story, for example, and we'll assign that to a developer. What the developer will do is they will look at the source of truth for this application, which is our version control system, Git in this case, and they'll pull those changes into their development environment. They now have an editable copy of the application where they can build this user story that they've been assigned. And they can iterate on this, making changes in their environment, pushing code back to Git as necessary until they're happy with the piece of work that they've done. Once they're happy, what they'll do is they'll open a thing called a pull request. So pull request is a concept in Git that allows you to take work that's been done in one area or branch and merge that work into another area. And this merge concept is important because when you have multiple developers working on things in parallel, you have this possibility of conflicts, right? Imagine developer A receives a story that says, make this button blue, and developer B receives a story that says, make this button red. And both users try and push their work through to the UAT environment at the same time. The system won't intuitively know which developer had the right idea and did the right thing in this case. And so when we open a pull request, Git will check for us whether we have any of these conflicts, and it will allow us to resolve them. So that's the first benefit of opening a pull request. The second benefit of a pull request is we have a pipeline that hooks in and detects that this pull request has happened. And what it'll do is it'll take the developer's work and it'll build it and deploy it to a special environment called validation. This step ensures that any work the developer has done compiles into a valid solution that can be deployed into an environment. And optionally, once you've deployed your code to a validation environment, you can start running automated tests against that code. This validation step is a blocker for approving the pull request. That means that unless the code passes validation, no one can actually push it through into the UAT environment. And this is really great for preventing accidental pushes of bad code into UAT, which can then affect your testers. There's a final great advantage of opening pull requests, which is that it allows for manual approvals as well. You can tell Git that you're only allowed to merge features into UAT as long as developer or lead developer X or Y approves this change. And so traditionally what we'll do is we'll say, okay, lead developers are assigned these requests, and when they receive them, instead of just blindly clicking approve, they'll perform a code review on the changes that have happened. And very helpfully, Git will actually highlight exactly what has changed inside the application for the lead developer to review. They can have a conversation, obviously, with the original developer and a demo and things like that. But even just by looking at the source code stored in Git, they can see what has changed and then approve it or reject it. Once this process has happened, we can do this thing called a merge, which takes that code, pushes it into the UAT environment, and it's now available to end users. The pipelines do some other fantastic work once this happens. If you've ever tried to deploy a solution into an environment before, you'll know there's a couple of things you need to set up every time. If you use custom connectors, you need to set up authentication. If you use flows, you know they'll need to use connection references. And the pipelines have answers to all of these problems by allowing you to define configuration for each environment. And then when you deploy, it will apply that configuration for you automatically. All of this to say, we can really easily build stuff in one environment, deploy it to a different environment for testing purposes, and then at the end of a sprint, for example, if we're working in sprints, we can deploy that very same code into a production environment where we know it's been fully tested and is ready to go. So that's a feel for what the actual process looks like. Let's have a look at this Alm Health Check and see what kind of things you should be striving for to achieve a solid ALM story within your organization. The first thing, and you can start with this even before setting anything else up, is to ensure that you're working in solutions. Solutions are the way to go on the Power Platform nowadays. They allow you to package various flows and applications and even Dataverse tables together into one package that's super easy to move across environments. So you want to make sure that you have solutions for each one of your projects, that you're using the right publishers for each one of your project as well, so you can help with support later down the line. Publishers can store great things like support email addresses and more information. So solutions are really a great way to go. Next, let's take a look at deployment. So what you want for deployment is an automated, consistent process that's deploying managed solutions into designated environments. Pretty simple there, but you don't want to have users manually moving stuff across environments using unmanaged solutions or not using solutions at all. And each developer kind of is doing their own thing. You want a consolidated, automated process. Then let's talk about source of truth. There's two potential sources of truth on the Power Platform for where the technically official version of your source code lives. Either it can live in a developer environment or some kind of environment that is your source of truth, or it can live in source control. Now, the advantage of having your application live in source control is that source control is really designed for this kind of thing. If your app lives in Git, you get all kinds of benefits, such as blames, which, for example, let you see who changed each part of the application. It also means that different developers can work on different parts of the application at the same time and then push all those changes to Git. So it's really useful to have your source of truth be a source control system such as Git. And then finally, developer environments. Ideally, you want to have isolated, disposable developer environments rather than one big dev environment. And the core reason for this is it's really hard to secure developer environments, right? As a developer, you want as much permission as possible in your environment to set things up the way you need to. You might need System Customizer to provision tables. You might need System Administrator to create new roles. And because of all of this, it doesn't really make sense to have one big dev environment across your organization, because every single developer is going to have to be an admin in there, and it's going to generally lead to a chaotic environment. So better to create these disposable, self-contained environments that are either good for a single developer or a single project, and you then push code from there into source control. And once you're done with that environment, you can get rid of it because your code lives in source control. So I hope that's given you a bit of a flavor for what it looks like to use professional ALM tooling in the Power Platform. But to really cement this, I'm going to jump into a quick demo here where I'm going to push a feature from my development environment into source control. And you can kind of see just how easy this is using some of the tooling that Microsoft have provided for us. So I'm going to share my screen here. And what you'll see in a moment is a couple of key things. Up at the top right here, you see a solution that I'm working on. So this solution is called Test Solution. And up at the top left, what you see is the Alm Accelerator for Advanced Makers. This is a Canvas application developed by Microsoft that integrates with Azure DevOps down at the bottom right here to allow us to push our code from the Power Platform into Git and then back into other upstream environments later without us having to touch Azure DevOps. As a developer, I might not ever go into Azure DevOps, but we'll see there are other reasons why developers might want to go into DevOps, but because of the Alm Accelerator, it's not strictly necessary. So to show you this in practice, what we're going to do here is we're going to add a flow into the solution, and then we're going to look at what it's like to push that flow into an upstream environment. So what I'll do is I'll hit Add, and I'll choose Automation Cloud Flow here. I will create a new cloud flow. And the purpose of this flow isn't really anything, so we'll just make it do nothing, essentially. We'll do that most traditional of programs. We'll create a simple hello world flow. So we've got a manually triggered flow here, and it's going to say hello world. And we can save this with a name like new flow for ALM. And as soon as that's saved, what we'll do is we'll hop over to the Alm Accelerator and we'll push our change. So here we are in the Alm Accelerator, and you can see that it's really simple. We just press this nice big button here called Push Changes to Git, and a pane pops up that allows us to specify a few different things. First of all, the tool asks us, do we want to create a new branch for this piece of work? And in this case, I'm going to say yes, and I want to base this on vNext. So vNext corresponds, broadly speaking, to the UAT environment. And so we're going to create our branch based on vNext, and we're going to call it, we have a naming convention here at WM where we call things by our name. So I'll call this Matt P, and then add new app. So now any developer who looks at this branch can see, okay, I did this, and it was to add a new application. And we can add a commit message as well. And this is really useful for developers later on because they can see why this change was made. And so I'm going to say added new flow to demo ALM functionality. And I'll press the commit button. And just as easy as that, my code is now being streamed from the Power Platform into Azure DevOps. And the way this happens in the background is using these things called pipelines. So you can see here we have this pipeline called export solution to Git. And if I refresh this page, you should see the most recent run of this pipeline. There it is. Now, you can see that it's been queued. We have some runners that will pick this up in just a minute, and that'll push our code to Git. However, because this is a demo and I don't want to spend forever on it, I prepared a commit earlier in our repository, and I will show you that instead. So I created a branch called matp test pipelines earlier where I committed some code. And let's take a look at what actually happened in Git and what we're storing as our source of truth. So here we have our solution that I committed. And you'll notice that I actually have another solution in this repo as well. You can store multiple different solutions to a single repository. So if your project consists of multiple solutions, that's not an issue. And so we have some pipelines that actually facilitate this process. But more importantly, we have our solution. And in our solution, we have all kinds of different assets. We have our flows, we have some customizations, and we have our Canvas apps. And one great thing actually is when you push stuff into Git, Canvas apps in this case, the tooling is aware that Canvas apps actually are these sort of MS app files that are not very compatible with source control. And so Microsoft have built some tooling that converts these MS app files into something that is more friendly for source control. So you'll see here my Canvas app is now just a collection of YAML files that define the functionality in my application. So you can see how this app has a couple different labels and a button. That's all plain to see in text here. And in fact, if I wanted to rename a bunch of different stuff in my application, I could do this in two ways. I could open the app up and find everywhere in the app that it was mentioned and rename it. Or because this is a plain text file, I could edit it straight here in Git, and I could find any instance of that word and just, Control F, replace it. And I could do this across multiple different files if I pull this into Visual Studio Code, for example. So it's a really great experience. So you've taken some code, you've pushed it from your dev environment, and now you want to make it available in UAT. You're happy with it and you want to push this across. How do you do that? Well, we turn now to another button in the Alm Accelerator called Create a Pull Request. By pressing this button, you can actually say, I want to take my source, which is Mac P-Test pipelines in this case, and I want to push it through to vNext. You can specify a little bit of metadata like a title and a description for this change. So here I'll say add flow. A nice little description. And when I click create here, what's going to happen is Azure DevOps is going to create that pull request that I just mentioned. Apologies, it's here. And so if we switch over, we should be able to see a new pull request here. And you can see how at this point, a few different things have kicked off. We have our validation, which is running and will block the completion of this project. You can see that we have additional reviewers. In this case, we haven't actually added any, but we could also enforce the addition of work items to a story, for example. We can have commentary, and I can come in and actually see what code was committed. So if I click on the updates button here, I could see all of the different things that happened. And if I click on files, I can see what changed between the last version of this application and the current version across all files. So really powerful functionality there. So I hope that's given you an idea for what it looks like, once again, to work with the ALM functionality across the Power Platform. You can see how this mix of low code for building, but really powerful tooling enables a really productive developer experience where you can build robust, reliable applications on the Power Platform at a fraction of the cost of other platforms or full code solutions. All right, so now that we've covered some of the more techie stuff, how to set up the platform and how to actually enable your center of excellence, what tools to install, let's take a look at how to bring users to the platform. As you recall, right at the top of this call, I discussed that it's super important that not only you set up an environment, but that from the very beginning, you have users on the platform. And to help us out with that, we have the lovely Annie Lee.
Thank you, Matt. So, sorry, guys. So the fifth step in setting up your CoE is nurture. As with any technology initiative, if you want to realize true return on investment, you can't simply put the initiative in place and expect your colleagues to understand how, why, and when they should engage with it. So nurture is all about the people side of change. As part of nurture, there are several types of activities you could carry out within your organization, as shown here: training initiatives and providing technical guidance, identifying Power Platform champions and super users to lead the change, hosting app-in-a-day trainings or hackathons to generate ability and excitement. And what we're going to focus the next few minutes on is standing up a citizen developer program. So to begin, let's dive more into this concept of a citizen developer program with a quick and fun introductory video. right, so we love a good video moment, and as you might be starting to see, by establishing citizen developers, you can achieve impactful solutions more quickly, give employees the autonomy and ability to create their own solutions, take some of that onus away from IT, and really embed a culture of entrepreneurship and employee empowerment in your organization. As an additional bonus, creating a community of citizen developers in-house can reduce your dependency on third parties, even like us, saving additional time and money for you. So, what does a citizen developer program look like, and how do we go about creating one? The Citizen Developer Program is 10 weeks of training and mentorship with WM Reply, in which we help guide employees who are interested in being a citizen developer through the following steps. We begin by working with the developer to identify the business need they wish to solve and understand the gaps between the current state and ideal state. We then help them define and refine their idea, clarifying the aim and benefits of the solution. And next up is design. So we'll work with employees to design their app's concept, look and feel, and user flow. And then we help them to develop their app and give them training on Power Platform in the process. When it's time to test, we assist in the piloting of their solution with a small group, as well as user testing and the feedback integration process. And when it's all said and done, we help launch the app to the business. So by the end of these 10 weeks, employees are then equipped with the power to solve relevant business problems on their own and take things into their own hands with Power Platform. And as great as it all sounds, you might be asking, how do we get people invested in even being part of the Citizen Developer Program? And the answer is with Adcar, a tried and trusted change management framework that applies to any kind of organizational change, really. Adcar stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. WM Reply, or folks from your Center of Excellence, which we will discuss a little bit more later, would begin with awareness, spreading the word about Power Platform and its benefits, introducing the Citizen Developer Program, and informing employees of how to get involved. Then comes generating excitement, or the desire component. And this is done by facilitating positive discussions about the Citizen Developer Program and explaining the real what's in it for me aspect, as well as doing buzz events like hackathons to increase curiosity. And then once employees are interested in being a citizen developer, it's time for the Citizen Developer Program, that 10 weeks, to really take flight and provide the knowledge and ability components, allowing them to develop custom Power Platform apps. And after they've completed the Citizen Developer Program and their solution is live, those developers then become champions, a source of knowledge and mentorship for future citizen developers. These champions also help keep the interest of being a citizen developer alive within your organization, reinforcing its benefits. And over time, this reinforcement piece develops into a cycle of internally run citizen developer programs, resulting in a citizen developer community. So as more and more citizen developers are upskilled, that community of in-house champions and experts grows and then guides the next, what you could call, generation of developers. So as we can see, a citizen developer program is a large initiative to take on, but the return on investment is substantial when you think about the amount of money saved with no longer needing third parties to develop solutions, and the fact that your organization benefits from processes consistently being improved by new Power Platform apps. So the Citizen Developer Program and resulting community of citizen developers then becomes your business's greatest in-house asset, really making it something to invest in. So I know that was quick for the sake of time, but for the last element of today's workshop, I will turn it back over to Wayne to discuss infrastructure and tools. Over to you, Wayne.
Thanks, Annie. Yeah, and this will be brief, but our last step on that journey here is that infrastructure and tools step. And what we're thinking around here is how we can make those citizen developers that Annie's just been speaking about life easier. What tools can we put in place, or what infrastructure, what automation can we put in place that's really going to help them and make their life easier? So if we just move on to the next slide, what we have is we have a number of things such as reusable components, or providing them some design or UX guidelines. So that design and UX guidelines can be in the form of a templated app. Maybe it's a physical guide, a physical document defining the laws of UX, how a button should be styled, where a menu should sit. Just taking that need for them to have to think or know these things themselves out of their hands and making it really simple and easy for them. There's the reusable component. So as Matt mentioned earlier, you can use professional developers on this platform, and there's a thing called a PCF component, a Power Component Framework. And what that allows us to do is to code our solutions or components or little parts of our solutions in like TypeScript. So maybe we want to connect to Google to check addresses. We could code that as a component, and we could put it into a catalog that all of our citizen developers could then use in their apps without having to use any code, without having to know how to talk to the Google APIs. They just take this component, configure it, and put it in their application, and it can be used across the organization. So yeah, getting those tools on that last step to make those citizen developers' lives easy is the last piece of the puzzle. And one thing just to call out, as you can see on the screen, there was the PCF gallery. It's a really good open source resource where you can go and download these PCF components that other people have built. You can play with them, adapt them, have a look how they work, and it's a really good one to go and check out. Now, I know it said we would have some questions and answers at the end. Unfortunately, we all love talking so much that we've completely run out of time. But what we will do, any questions that are in the chat here, we will respond to via email follow-up, and we'll have our contact details on there as well if there's anything specific you want to ask after today's webinar. So I'd just like to thank everyone for joining and listening to us, and have a good day.